I have maybe a little different background than people who have spoken here before. I come from hardcore materialism, physicalism. I studied computer engineering. That's my PhD. I've worked with reconfigurable computing, artificial intelligence for many years in the corporate world, in government-sponsored laboratories like CERN and other places. And one of my passions, one of the things that really drove me back in those years, say 15, 20 years ago, was this idea of creating an artificial sentience. We would call it artificial intelligence, but what we meant was artificial consciousness, create a living creature that could feel, that could experience. And I wrestled with that in my mind for a long time, while busy with engineering jobs, which were just an attempt to simulate information flows that we find in human brain, simulate that in a computer. I was always asking myself, what reason do I have to believe that if I simulate these information flows, that this computer will suddenly become conscious or feel anything? Why will those information flows be accompanied by experience? I mean, I could simulate kidney function on my computer perfectly, and the computer wouldn't start urinating on my desk, right? The simulation is not the phenomenon. And I was wrestling with that for quite a while until by chance, I read a paper by philosopher David Chalmers, a paper about the hard problem of consciousness. I don't know whether any of you have heard about it, but the idea is that it doesn't matter what information system you put together. We have no way to deduce the qualities of experience, the warmth of love, the redness of an apple. There's no way we can deduce that from physical arrangements in an information system. There's no way, even in principle, to do that. Physical parameters don't translate into qualities of experience. They are abstract quantities. There is no bridge to felt qualities. So you can do whatever you want in artificial intelligence. You have no reason to think that that will be accompanied by experience. And that for me was a light bulb. It went off like a bomb in my head. And I realized that the entire paradigm, this physicalist, materialist paradigm we are operating under, is utterly untenable. You could argue that it doesn't explain anything, because all we have are the qualities of experience. And then, cutting back to something more familiar to our community here, to us today. I don't know if you share this experience. I think you do, because many people do. I think one of the most striking aspects of a trance, be it a psychedelic trance, a meditative trance, or for some people a schizophrenic trance, whatever, a lucid dream, which is a form of trance as well. One of the most striking characteristics is the sense of reality that we have sometimes, not always, but that we sometimes have in it, right? The idea that this feels very substantially, concretely real, present. In the study of Rick Strassman back in the University of New Mexico in the mid-90s, people described it as the DMT trance in that case, as more real than real. There is a felt immediacy to that sort of transcends conceptualization, transcends our theories about what is allowed, what is supposed to be real. Because after all, in a trance, we may be laying in our beds with a mask on our eyes and earplugs and exploring other universes. So that is mental, right? It cannot be physical. Your eyes are closed, your ears are not picking up the melodies you're hearing, your body is not going anywhere, and you're living a universe of experiences that feels very real, yet it is mental. So the question that this raises, and it popped in my head very strongly several years ago, is why do we not think that this right now isn't also mental? I mean, we all have proof in dreams, lucid dreams, trances, that mind alone, without being modulated by a physical world, is perfectly capable of creating, in a standalone way, all the qualities we associate with reality. concreteness, palpability, solidity, continuity, a sense of immediacy, of presence. Mind is capable of generating all that. We know that. This is not up to discussion. In fact, in a book that was published in 2011, neuroscientist David Eagleman, it was a nice book, it was a popular book. He summarized all the interesting stuff in the status quo of neuroscience at that time, only the interesting stuff. And he says that the same brain regions, the same brain processes that are engaged in generating, for instance, the experiences and the qualities of a dream are engaged right now. Your experiences right now are being generated by the same areas and the same processes in your brain that generate the experiences of your dreams. The difference is that this right now is modulated by your sensory input, while the dream is unmodulated, it's autonomous. So why do we, having said all this, mind is capable of generating all the qualities we associate with reality. Why do we think that this is not mental? Why do we think that this is physical in the sense of being a world fundamentally outside and separate from mind? Does anybody risk, I can give you a list of reasons, but does anybody want to guess a reason why we think like this? Anybody dares raise a hand? And I can start. I can give you one reason. People say, if this were mental, it would be akin to a dream. Then how come we are all sharing the same dream as separate people? We couldn't be sharing the same dream. We are separate people. Therefore, there must be something outside mind that's modulating each of our experiences as we observe it from different points of view. This is one reason. There's another reason. A couple of weeks ago, I was in London speaking at a meeting of the Psychedelic Society of London. Great meeting, by the way. And before me, the speaker was Robin Carhart-Harris from Imperial College, the guy who has done lots of psilocybin LSD studies recently. And he said, well, if these were all mental, why can't I go through walls? Why can't I just go through walls? What he was alluding to was this idea that if the world is mental, it should be acquiescent to our volition. In other words, we should be able to change the laws of physics at will. This is a false implication. Very obviously false one, by the way, but a lot of people intuitively think that this is a good reason to believe that this is not mental. Your trip is mental. This is different. This is fundamentally different. You watching me right now isn't mental. So I just gave you two reasons. There's a third one. There are many. I'll speak about three today. There is a undeniable correlation between brain functioning and your experiences. I mean, the fact that psychedelics as a substance can totally alter your experience of reality seems to attest to that. You put something material in your system and your experiences changed completely. Off you go to the races, to other worlds. If you're knocked in the head, you may pass out. If you hyperventilate, you may pass out as well. If you take alcohol, your experience of reality will change and it can get more sophisticated. We can measure patterns of brain activity and find correlations between patterns measured and what people report they are experiencing. So there seems to be this tight correlation between measurable brain activity and experience, which many people say means that brain activity causes experience. So if you interfere with brain activity, experience changes because activity causes experience. Three reasons, then, that people claim, that people use to say this is physical, it is not mental. Okay, what is this theory of nature, then, that seems to explain these three facts? That reality is autonomous, independent of our wishes, that we are all sharing the same world, and that brain activity correlates with the experience. In philosophy, it's called physicalism, and it's the idea that reality is outside and independent of mind. Mind is generated by local physical arrangements of stuff, and these local physical arrangements get modulated by an outside world generating experience. That's physicalism, and it's the reigning paradigm under which we operate. It is this that tells you, or attempts to tell you, that when you die, your consciousness is gone. Because death is the disintegration of this particular arrangement of matter that seems to generate consciousness. So if that arrangement disintegrates, you're toast. your history. The only reason for you to believe that death is the end of your consciousness is this theory, well, technically it's called an ontology, called physicalism or materialism, ontic materialism, not the materialism of my life is about spending money and I went to buy all kinds of stuff. That's not what I mean, that's ethical materialism. Now, for us to contemplate an alternative to this, which could make sense not only of reality right now, but make sense of the trance as well, which I think is the biggest open question for anybody who has had that experience. The biggest question is, what the hell is that? Right? There is no trivial explanation for that. To contemplate an alternative, we have to look into exactly what is explained and what is not explained by this mainstream narrative of materialism. Bear with me. I'll get slightly technical, but it's not difficult at all. It's very obvious. I actually quote Terence McKenna because his intuition was spot on, although he was not coherent in his use of concepts. Every theory of nature requires at least one, quote, free miracle. You probably have heard this, right? Terence McKenna used to say this a lot. Every theory of nature requires one free miracle. What is that free miracle? Technically, it's called an ontological primitive. Now, it's an arrogant name for something very simple. What is an explanation? An explanation is when you explain one thing in terms of another. If you explain A in terms of B, then what you're saying is that there is nothing to A but something about the dynamics of B. For instance, I can explain my body in terms of organ systems. My circulatory system, my respiratory system, my digestive system. I can explain those systems in terms of tissues. I can explain tissues in terms of cells, cells in terms of molecules, molecules in terms of atoms, atoms in terms of subatomic particles. Eventually, you hit a wall. You can't keep on explaining one thing in terms of another forever, right? It's quite obvious. At some point, you hit a wall and you say, at this level, nature simply is. There is no explanation for that level. Now, that level is the ontological primitive. The mainstream articulation of physicalism together with physics today would tell you that the ontological primitives are a menu of fundamental subatomic particles. There is no explanation for those subatomic particles. They simply are. What they then try to do is to explain everything else in terms of those subatomic particles, right? But they have their free miracle. Now, there are other less mainstream approaches, but still pretty hardcore, pretty hard-nosed. For instance, string theory, you would say superstrings are the ontological primitives. It's their vibrations that give rise to everything else. I can explain everything else in terms of the vibrations of superstrings, but I can't explain the superstrings. Or quantum field theory, the quantum vacuum. Everything is an excitation of the quantum vacuum, but I can't explain the bloody quantum vacuum. It just is. And so on and so forth. Brains in M theory, the list is enormous. But what is interesting is that in all these cases, people choose a concept of thought as the ontological primitive. Nobody has ever seen a superstring, or the brain, or the quantum vacuum, or even the fundamental subatomic particles. I've worked at CERN. What we see are the products of their decay. Nobody has seen a fundamental subatomic particle. It's something that is inferred. It's a construct of thought. And then we say, those constructs of thoughts are the only real reality. They are the only thing that is really there. Everything else we make up. Hey, that's a construct of thought. If you step back and you contemplate your experience, where do you start? You start from your consciousness. Your consciousness is the sine qua non of existence. It is the thing without which there is nothing to talk about. There is no knowledge without consciousness. So a pretty obvious alternative to physicalism, which could make sense of a lot of things, is this idea that consciousness itself, unbound in space, a kind of universal consciousness, is the sole ontological primitive. And that all of existence are patterns of excitations of this universal consciousness. There is nothing woo-woo or new age or nothing crazy about this. This is pretty solid, coherent philosophy. The problem then is, and I'll go back to those three facts in the beginning, if universal consciousness is the only thing that exists, how come I can't read your thoughts? How come you don't know what's going on in Jupiter right now? How come I can't change the laws of physics and go through walls? How come if you shoot me in the head, something will happen to my inner life? Okay, in 1 hour it's and I want to speak for less than an hour because I want to interact with you, but I'll just give you some brushstrokes of how we can go about it and try to convince you that this is the only reason this is not the obvious alternative, the obvious explanation that is embraced by the entire culture is history and prejudice. And I would not have time to talk about all the historical and psychological reasons for this. I'll just leave you with this statement for what it's worth. What I wanted to do now is to explain those three basic facts in terms of there only being universal consciousness. A rigorous explanation would require slides, would require more time, so I'll just give you some general brushstrokes. Have you ever heard of a psychiatric condition called dissociative identity disorder? It used to be called multiple personality disorder. It's when a person exhibits multiple so-called alters, multiple centers of consciousness with different personalities, proclivities, tastes, tendencies, wishes, memories. So it's like there would be multiple people in a single person, in a single individual psyche, because that psyche gets fragmented. Dissociation is a fragmentation of the normal integration of memory, experience, emotion, and sense of identity. When that disintegrates, when that dissociates, you have multiple centers of consciousness, each with its own sense of identity, right? Now, what I want to put forward to you, and this will be a big step. Normally, I would articulate this, it would take a lot more time to build up to this, but I'll just present you with the conclusion. What you can think about is that universal consciousness undergoes very naturally, not because of pathology, it undergoes very naturally a process of dissociation. Now that I planted this idea, let's come back to the study of dissociative identity disorder as we know today. There was a paper published in 2014, a study done in the Netherlands by Schlumpf et al., in which they basically put people with dissociative identity disorder in a brain scanner, and they measured the patterns of brain activity in those people, and they compared that to the patterns of brain activity of actors simulating dissociative identity disorder. Not only simulating outwardly, but trying to feel within as if they were different people, as if they had multiple alters, trying to feel within. And it turns out that the scans of patients with actual dissociative identity disorder looked very different from those of the actors. In other words, and this is an important point, there is something dissociation looks like. It has an extrinsic image. When mind dissociates and fragments itself, that fragmentation into multiple alters looks like something that you can point to and say, here is a dissociative process. It has an image. In another study in Germany last year, 2015, doctors were studying a woman who had multiple alters as a consequence of trauma early in her life. And a couple of those alters claimed to be blind, to not be able to see. And I think most people would say, well, it's just a psychological thing. Of course she can see, but she just convinced herself that she can't, but everything else is working fine. Well, they hooked the patient up on an EEG machine, which also builds an image of brain activity. And lo and behold, the brain activity normally associated with vision in the visual cortex here at the back of the brain was not there when the alter that claimed to be blind was in control of the woman's body. Even though her eyes were wide open and she was looking at the doctors, no brain activity, the normal brain activity did not register in the visual cortex. And then when a normal alter with sight would return, boom, popped the brain activity back up. So, second key message. Dissociation has the power to blind you. Maybe you don't see what's happening in Jupiter. Maybe I can't read your thoughts, because we are dissociated from each other. And that has the power to blind me and you to anything else occurring or unfolding in universal consciousness outside our respective alters. And maybe our physical bodies are what dissociation in universal consciousness looks like. Just like dissociation in the brain of a patients with dissociative identity disorder has something that dissociative processes in that brain look like something under a brain scanner. Now, in universal consciousness, we don't need a brain scanner because we are within it already. There is no skull to pierce through to make a measurement. We are within universal consciousness. And if we are dissociated alters within it, we can see the extrinsic images of other dissociated alters. I see several in front of me right now. Maybe not only you, but every living creature, insects, amoeba. I mean, you may say, what reason do you have, Bernardo, to believe that amoeba have a conscious inner life like us? Just look at the behavior of amoeba. They construct little shells by picking up grains of sand from the mud where they live, with surprising symmetry. Plants have surprisingly intelligent behavior as well, if you could speed up their behavior and see, fast forward what they actually do. There is even a proposal for a new field of study called plant neurobiology. It's a proposal made in 2006. It's quite surprising. It was not tongue-in-cheek, it's a serious proposal. So the idea I wanted to leave you with is that we don't need this notion of a physical world fundamentally non-mental, fundamentally outside mind, to explain reality, to explain the fact that we all seem to inhabit the same world, the fact that brain activity correlates with experience, the fact that we can't change the laws of nature. All we need is the idea of an irreducible universal consciousness as ontological primitive, and the idea of dissociation, which then explains why we can't change the laws of physics. I can't go through a wall because I'm dissociated from the mental process that maintains that wall in existence. I can't change that. My volition is dissociated from it, and will be for as long as I am alive. Because life is the image of that dissociation. I can end that dissociation, but that ending has a name. We call it death. Death is the end of the dissociation, the reintegration of our inner life into a broader context. Now, to tie it up back to psychedelics, studies like that of Carhart Harris and Payano Fontes in Brazil, who studied ayahuasca, show that the effect of psychedelics in the brain is largely to reduce brain activity, mainly in the default mode network, which we normally associate with the ego. You know, when you're not engaged in an activity, you're just thinking, ruminating within yourself. That's the default mode network doing that. It gives you your sense of identity. Psychedelics dampen the activity everywhere in the brain, but mainly there. Activity does not increase anywhere in the brain under the effect of psychedelics, which is counterintuitive if you're assuming that experiences are generated by brain activity. Gosh, you're having the experience of your life. The study by Griffiths in Johns Hopkins showed that 67% of participants have rated a psychedelic experience amongst the 5 most significant and intense of their lives. And that doesn't come with any increase in brain activity, it comes with a reduction compared to the normal baseline. It's very difficult to make sense of this under physicalism. It may not be impossible, but it's very, very difficult. Now, under this alternative I'm offering you today for you to think about, if normal brain activity is the image of dissociation, if normal brain activity is reduced, then that means a reduction of dissociation, right? It's the logical step to make. And what is a reduction of dissociation? It's an increase in integration of memory, sense of identity. Of course, that will come with an enrichment of experiences. You're remembering a whole bunch of things. Actually, at least for me, that's one of the characteristics of a psychedelic trance. It's this idea that you're not learning, you're remembering. It's like, darn, I've been here before, I've known this before, somehow I forgot about it. And now that my brain activity is all the way down, I remember it because I'm less dissociated. That's the hypothesis I'd like to offer you today. And I would like to open it up for questions. To help you, maybe to ask a question, I'll challenge you to challenge me if you think I'm full of shit because of this idea of universal consciousness and I'm just a new age guru, chaps with Deepak Chopra, who, by the way, is my friend and I respect him very much, challenge me. Tell me a reason why you think this hypothesis doesn't work. And I once made a video answering 16 challenges from different people, well-known atheists and materialists. If you don't feel comfortable with this, that's your chance to challenge it in a friendly way, or to ask any question you want.
Or unprove your idea.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It goes back to Karl Popper and falsifiability. The question is, can I imagine some experiment that could disprove or prove what I'm saying? Now, let's take a step back here, because he probably has a background in philosophy, and there's a lot behind his question that will not be apparent to most of you. In science, since Karl Popper in the 60s, we have this idea that if you cannot conceive of an experiment to prove your own theory wrong, then your theory is not worth considering. I mean, for example, the flying spaghetti monster is not falsifiable. There is no experiment I can come up with that will prove that the flying spaghetti monster does not exist, right? So before I answer that question, I want to flip it around. My position is that it is physicalism, materialism, that is equivalent to the flying spaghetti monster. Physicalism postulates the existence of a world outside experience. I can have no access to that world. It's a concept. It's an intellectual inference, purely abstract. It doesn't have any qualities at all. It's entirely abstract. You can't even visualize it, because to visualize is to appeal to the qualities of experience. That is the flying spaghetti monster. The question should be, can you prove that there is something outside experience? Now go ahead and try, because you can only know what is experienced. It is impossible to prove definitely that there is anything outside experience. Having said that, the criteria for choosing an ontology is not a scientific theory. An ontology is an interpretation of scientific theory. Scientific theory is about predicting the behavior of nature. It's saying, under these conditions, that should happen. Then you test it. You set up the conditions. Did that happen or not? If it didn't, your theory is falsified. What I'm proposing is not a scientific theory, in the sense that I'm not trying to predict nature. I'm trying to interpret nature, to interpret the nature of being. What does it mean to say that something is, that something exists? The criteria for deciding for an ontology are different. They are parsimony, internal logical consistency, and explanatory power. I would claim that my proposal is the most parsimonious, because my only ontological primitive is a fact of existence, is the primary fact of existence, is the existence of consciousness. I say consciousness is the ontological primitive, not a conceptualization of thought. And then I say I need nothing else. I can explain everything else in terms of dissociation and patterns of excitation of consciousness. That's most parsimonious. Physicalism requires that you imagine that there is a world outside experience, which then adds to experience, so that already is not parsimonious. And then physicalism fails to explain experience, starting from that abstraction. That's the hard problem of consciousness. You cannot deduce the qualities of experience from parameters of physical arrangements. So I would say my proposal is not only more parsimonious, it has more explanatory power as well, because it basically explains everything based on one ontological primitive, while physicalism has many ontological primitives and fails to explain the primary fact of experience. Now, having said all that, I think studies with psychedelics, studies with anything that impairs brain function while being accompanied by a sense of self-transcendence are very indicative that what I'm saying is a better alternative than physicalism. I mean, it's not only psychedelics that increase the richness of your inner life by impairing your brain function, and many other things do. Have you ever heard of the choking game? Nobody ever heard of it in this community. I expected somebody to hear about it. The choking game is teenagers worldwide do that. They partially strangulate themselves. I don't want to plant some bad ideas in your mind. This is very bad, or you should not do this, okay? But the idea is to trip without drugs by self-strangulation, partial strangulation. You block blood flow to your brain, and suddenly you're tripping. Now, how is that possible? You're reducing metabolism, you're reducing oxygen supply to your brain as a whole, you're closing up your jugular arteries. And boom, you're tripping out of your head, out of your mind, if you don't do that. take psilocybin. Okay, don't do that. Many other examples. There has been a study this year. There has been a study. They took about 100 veterans of the Vietnam War who had suffered brain damage, and they put them on a brain scanner to evaluate the brain damage, and they interviewed them. Turns out that brain damage correlates very tightly with mystical experience. These people are much more prone to have mystical experiences than people with an undamaged brain. I mean, the pattern is broad psychedelics, brain damage. Have you ever heard of acquired savant syndrome? Acquired savant is you have a normal person who is struck by lightning, shot in the head, or has dementia, Alzheimer, all kinds of ugly things happening to their brain, and suddenly they develop genius level skills. This happens a lot. You'd be surprised. There are books and articles written about this. So you see, there seems to be this consistent correlation that is the opposite of what physicalism would expect, and which is precisely what I'm putting forward to you, which is technically called idealism. Some call it cosmopsychism. I don't think it's the right name. I think it's different than cosmopsychism. I call it idealism. It makes sense of all that. Do I still have time to take another question? Let me have a quick look. I have plenty of time. I spoke for only half an hour. Go ahead. I'll repeat the question afterwards.
What do you think
So the question is, why would universal consciousness create dissociated alters that are not stable, which eventually get reabsorbed and then are recreated? In other words, this is another way to talk about why are living beings born and then they die and then they are born again? Why aren't we just born and we stick around forever, right? I do understand the question, because the moment you say that all nature is in a form of universal consciousness, we have this tendency to think of nature as an intelligent entity like ourselves. Intelligent in the sense of not only experiencing, but having cognition. Cognition is more than raw experience. In neuroscience, in cognitive sciences, cognition is the act of coming to know something as opposed to simply experiencing. You also have metacognition, which is to know that you know, is to know that you are experiencing. I'm not saying that universal consciousness has even cognition, let alone metacognition. I'm just saying that it experiences. There is raw experience. For you to get an intuition about that, I don't know whether I referred to this already today. There has been a study in 2007 by Matt Singer and I forgot the other author. But they basically showed that when you dream at night, not lucid dreams, normal dreams, you do not have metacognition. You cannot self-reflect. You cannot re-represent mental contents. In other words, let me translate all of this to basic English terms. You are experiencing, but you do not know that you are experiencing. You are like a leaf floating in the wind. You're flowing with the Tao. You're not thinking, what's happening with me now? Where did I come from? Where am I going? Why am I doing this? You're just with the flow of the Tao in your dreams. That is what it means to experience, but not know that you experience. That is what it means to have mind, but not metacognition, not self-reflection. My own position is that universal consciousness at its basic level, without any dissociation, without any hierarchy or structure of dissociation, is not self-reflective. It is not metacognitive. It's not even cognitive. It just has raw experience. And the unfolding of those experiences are governed by what we call the laws of nature, which, under the framework of what I'm talking about, the laws of nature are the manifestation of universal archetypes. Are you guys familiar with Jung's ideas of archetypes? Archetypes are the basic patterns according to which experience is supposed to unfold. James is going to talk about the archetypes of psilocybin today or tomorrow, James? Tomorrow, which is fascinating. So the basic idea is that this goes back all the way to Plato and his forms. I mean, this is a very old idea in human thought, that at the basis of nature, there are some very fundamental templates, experiential templates, like For us humans, the idea of the father archetype, the trickster archetype, the self archetype, the shadow archetype, these are templates according to which experience unfolds for us humans. At a universal level, I think there would be much more basic archetypes, maybe even geometrical in nature, archetypes related to symmetry. If you study physics, you see that physicists are driven by this idea of beauty, which is basically a search for a theory that is symmetric in a mathematical space. And often this proves to be right. I mean, we had a disappointment this year. We couldn't prove supersymmetry at CERN. We were sure we were going to do that, but it's not there, and it's looking increasingly like it's not going to be there. But in general, it works very well. So I think the formation of dissociated alters, or living beings, which is the other word for it, is driven by archetypal patterns. Archetypes at a very basic level in the fabric of reality. They do not arise from intentionality in the sense of a plan. Universal mind didn't one day wake up and think, well, let me blow myself up to bits and experience life in the form of very limited human beings with a lot of suffering and pain and the beauty as well, you know, but and then die. And do it all over again. I don't think there was a self-reflective, metacognitive plan to do that. It's a manifestation of natural law. It's just that natural law is mental archetypes in nature. That's all I'm saying. I'm not denying naturalism. On the contrary, I'm just saying that the character of naturalism is mental. Did I stimulate anybody else to come up with another question to give me James?
You actually started answering the culture of people smoking DMT.
Okay, the question is whether I can speak to the experience of speaking perhaps or interacting with dissociated alters of universal consciousness during the trance, during, for instance, a DMT trance. Or
In particular, there's a difference within your model here of the archetypes, the young self archetypes, and these various entities that interact with.
Yeah, okay, the difference between dissociated alters and what Jung called the archetypes, in particular during the trance, in particular even in the DMT trance, which is very prone to the presence of entities. I think we have to distinguish the dissociated alter from the archetype. A dissociated alter is a configuration of mind in which there is a break in the normal integration of self-identity, memory, emotion, cognition. That's one thing. The other thing is the archetype. The archetype never dissociates. The archetype is built into the fabric of reality. It's the basic patterns that simply are, according to which experience unfolds, and therefore, according to which the whole of nature unfolds, insofar as nature is the unfolding of experience. I think alters, or dissociated alters, they manifest archetypal behavior. I think the more self-reflective you are, and I think self-reflection only arises at the level of alters. Only alters have this configuration of consciousness wherein mind sort of turns in upon itself in order to experience knowledge of its own experience. Hofstadter called it a strange loop in his famous 1979 book, Godot Escher-Bach. He was a materialist, but his intuition was right on, except for his fucked up materialist assumption. But for the rest, I think he was right on. I think self-reflective alters, like us, can repress the manifestation of archetypes. Because by thinking about our own thoughts, by pondering our own experiences, we can play the judge. We can step out of ourselves, judge ourselves, and control ourselves. It's a sort of psychic split. Each one of you who is trying to improve yourself is doing exactly that. Who is there to improve who? Who is it that is trying to improve something else? I mean, you're basically splitting yourself in two within this field of self-reflection, right? And dissociated alters can do that because self-reflection is a characteristic of some of these dissociated alters and repress archetypal behavior. Kids haven't developed that self-reflective ability yet. They don't repress archetypal behavior at all. Small kids, I mean, they would cheat in a game if they feel like cheating. That's the trickster right there. They will manifest bad behavior. That's the shadow right there. Or they may cuddle a doll. That's the mother archetype. The archetypes just flow through kids. They flow through animals. We call the archetypal behavior in animals, we call them instinct. You can tame a horse, but the instincts will still be there. I think the universe flows according to very, very fundamental instincts. And the question then is, are the entities in the DMT trance really dissociated alters? We can reframe it in a different way. We can say, is there anything it is like to be the entity? Or does the entity exist only insofar as you experience it? Do you understand what I mean? For instance, I can close my eyes right now and imagine a red elephant. There it is. There's a red elephant in my imagination right now. Is there anything it is like to be that red elephant? Or does it exist only insofar as I imagine it now as an image? That's the crucial question. I think there is nothing it is like to be the red elephant that I just imagined. It's only an image in my mind, nothing more. But I think there is something it is like to be you. When I see you, I don't think your existence is limited to what I see, to the image in my mind right now. There is an inner life behind that image. What I see is just the extrinsic appearance of a whole universe of inner life. There is something it is like to be you. The question then is, again, I'm repeating myself, but I want to get this across. Is there anything it is like to be the entities of a DMT trance? I don't have the answer. Maybe because I never used DMT, but I have had psilocybin experiences in which I had a powerful impression that I was dealing with another creature, that there was something that was like to be it. Am I sure? No. No, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that you are a dissociated alter of universal consciousness. It could be that much of what we see in a trance, it depends on the trance. I mean, we try to generalize, put everything in one box. Trances can be so completely different that what we say of one is totally unapplicable to the next time we do it, right? But I think it is conceivable that at least some of the entities are manifestations of ourselves, mirrored in the mirror of our own imagination, maybe repressed aspects of ourselves that we cannot, that would be too traumatic to get to know firsthand, so we need to project them out in order to interact with them by proxy, if you know what I mean. To dance with ourselves by proxy and get used to that slowly in that dance until the moment where we achieve that recognition. Wow, it is me. It's me. It has been me all along. Maybe it takes a while to get to that point. Or maybe they're really trans-dimensional beings and there is something it is like to be them and they're trying to talk to us. For all I know, that could very well be the case. I don't know. I don't know.
People have experienced shared trips.
Shared trips. That's an extraordinarily interesting topic, because what gives us confidence that this right now is not just a projection of our own minds, is the fact that it seems to be shared, right? What other people report is very consistent with our own experiences. And we have all the clues that other people really are conscious beings in their own merit. So this is a shared experience. And then if you have a shared trance, a shared trip, wouldn't that lend to that trip the same sense of reality that we have for this? Even that sharing aspect? Yes, pretty much. Pretty much so.
It doesn't seem to be that uncommon. Quite normally you get into the same.
So he's saying that it can be quite common, especially when people are in a dark room together, that they share a lot of the experiences. Yeah. I do not know that firsthand. I have not had a shared experience. I tend to go very much inwards. You know, I go in very quickly. I would never trip here, for instance, to give you an idea of how I approach this. I do it very rarely. I haven't done it in a while, but when I do it, I blindfold myself and I put earplugs and I go to a very quiet room overnight, and I'm usually on my own. There is a sitter in the house aware of what's happening, but I usually do it on my own, and I go inward very much. So I do not have that experience. But if you report that, I have no reason to doubt you. I would be careful because there is a trickster archetype in our trips, and the way it manifests is wish fulfillment. If that archetype is activated, it tends to present to you proof of what you want to believe. Know what I mean? So it's very difficult to judge a trip on the specifics of its contents. If you try to extract broad conclusions from the particular contents of one particular trip, it's very tricky because you're setting yourself up to the trickster. What we can do is pull out from the details and stay with the generalities. Those are very reliable. And what are the generalities? Your sense of reality is a generality. Doesn't matter what's happening, it feels very real. It has the qualities of reality. That's very powerful. It's a very powerful generality.
I think that the tricksters also do a pretty good job at proving they're real.
The tricksters do a very good job in proving that they are real. Yeah, there was a book published some time ago, The Trickster and the Paranormal, and I don't know whether you heard about it. It's a very interesting book. It basically shows that even researchers of the paranormal who are rigorous, sincere, authentic, do not want to deceive themselves. After a while working in that field, they end up deceiving themselves in very clear ways.
Yeah, for example, I know about my, you might not be in the right energy.
I agree with you. His comment was that if you try to prove paranormal phenomena in laboratory settings, you can't really say whether you're proving or disproving anything because you're extracting the phenomenon from its natural environment, so to say. It's a paranormal phenomenon if they exist, and I suspect they do, although I haven't seen conclusive proof. Maybe there is some from ions, but I think the question is open. But if they do exist, you cannot extricate them from their emotional context. You cannot, a mother who has a paranormal experience trying to pull her kid out of the wreck of a car after an accident, the emotional charge, the emotional experiential context of that will activate a number of things that you cannot replicate under controlled laboratory conditions in which you ask people to look at cards. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just pathetic. So I agree with you. Disproving the paranormal under laboratory conditions is a tall order because you're not really exploring the phenomenon. You could prove it. Even if you do it with a small effect, you could prove it. I'll take his question now. Yeah, the question is the distinction between what I call an extrinsic appearance and inner life. In other words, if I imagine the elephant in my head, that elephant has an extrinsic appearance. It looks like something in my head. I can see the red elephant right now. But does the red elephant have inner life? Is there something it is like to be the red elephant? We can translate this question in this TV screen. I can see the TV screen. It's very substantially here. I can touch it. It's there. It has existence. But is there something it is like to be this TV screen? Does it have inner life, inner experience? So, without answering this question, I think the important point is to understand that these two questions are distinct. To say that something exists as an image does not imply that that something has inner life. Does not imply that there is something it is like to be that thing that you see. So my point is just to make this distinction. There are people, very serious people in academia today, who do not make that distinction. They are called panpsychists. And they basically say that everything has inner life. Even an electron, there is something it is like to be an electron. I think that is a basic, very basic philosophical error. And I'll tell you why. The patterns of experience, in my view, are the patterns of excitation of mind. It's like ripples on water, right? Ripples are patterns of excitation of water. Imagine the qualities of experience as different types of ripples on water, and water being mind itself. So when mind is calm, is in deep sleep, there are no ripples. It's just like the lake here. No ripples, very calm. When there are waves and ripples, then you're experiencing things. Big emotions are like tsunamis, very angry seas. Okay, that's the analogy, the metaphor. Now, what are things? Things are arbitrary conceptual divisions. We say, oh, there's a car. A car is a thing. Well, A car cannot work without the air to cool the engine and allow combustion. It doesn't work without the road that grips the tire, that allows it to move. It doesn't work without the gravity of the earth that pulls it towards the road. I mean, the boundaries of a car are completely arbitrary. They are epistemic. They are made for convenience. There are no things in the world. There are only dissociated alters, living beings, because there is something it is like to be them. And then individual subatomic particles are the pixels of these ripples of water, are the smallest discernible ripple. When people say that every subatomic particle is conscious, they are mixing up ripples with the building blocks of water. They are basically saying that water is made of ripples. That's basically it. When they say that, panpsychists say that atoms are conscious, atoms are ripples in water. What is conscious is the water. They are mixing up the patterns of excitation of mind with the building blocks of mind itself. Because of that, I don't think that because something appears in your experience, that appearance implies that something also has in a life, dissociated in a life, like you and I have. I don't think that's a direct implication. I think these are two separate questions.
Holographic aspect, that every pixel contains the whole.
The holographic aspect of reality, that every pixel, that subsets of reality contain enough information to create a representation of the whole. There's one thing that people normally misunderstand about holography. If you have a hologram and you break it in two, suppose it's the image of a church, and you break it in two, each half will have the image of the church. That is correct. But the resolution will be smaller in each half. So you do lose information. It's just that you don't lose a piece of the church. You lose information in a distributed way. So every half will still have the whole image, but with degraded resolution. So to speak of a holographic universe doesn't mean that all information is in every electron. That's not what it means. Do you understand what I mean? It means that the information is dispersed like a gas. In physics today, the holographic theory, which is taken very seriously in physics today, holographic theory, the idea is that this is a hologram and that all the information is on a ring surrounding the outer boundary of the universe being projected inwards. And then subatomic particles would be elements of that hologram, but you'd still have information distributed on the rim of the universe.
You lose information.
Each half will lose half of the information. It's just that that loss is distributed across the whole image. So you can still see the whole image, but at lower resolution. It becomes more pixelated.
What I thought at the time, I thought we might not have the problem.
The electron going down infinitely. Going down? What do you mean by going down?
Basically size.
Oh, yeah.
Then I might have to lose it. That's what I thought.
In the physical idea of a holographic universe, the electron is part of the hologram. The information is in the rim of the universe. So what you're seeing is already a projection of that information. So you're not losing the information because it's on the rim of the universe surrounding us. Yeah. But this is going a little bit away from the theme I was exploring. Maybe him first. I think he wanted to ask a question. Or she, all the way at the back. Oh, no. The difference between stones and, say, living material. So the difference between the inanimate and the animate universe. I'll tell you exactly what I think the difference is. I think the animate universe, life, biology, metabolism, things that have DNA, do protein transcription, burn calories, life in general. I think that is the image of dissociation in universal consciousness. When dissociation happens, you have an alter, and that alter has a dissociated inner life. There is something it is like to be that alter in and of itself. So I think there is something it is like to be every biological creature on this planet and elsewhere. Biology is the image of that dissociation. The inanimate universe is only one thing. It is the extrinsic image of the non-dissociated aspect of universal consciousness. The world's spiritual traditions they would use very poetic language. They would say, for instance, the universe is the body of God. Actually, that's pretty accurate. I mean, it's literally true if you accept a broad definition of the word God. The universe is the body of God. It is the extrinsic appearance of God's inner life. But I think there is only one inner life going on there that is not dissociated. The inanimate universe is the extrinsic appearance of the non-dissociated aspects of the universe. So there is nothing it's like to be a rock in and of itself. It isn't alive, so it isn't dissociated. A rock is a pixel of the extrinsic appearance of God's inner life. You can't take it out of its context. You cannot delineate it and look upon it as a thing in itself. In the same way that you can't take a picture and say, all the red pixels are a thing in themselves. No, they're part of the picture. You can't extricate them from their context. I don't think you can extricate any inanimate object out of their context. They are just part of one big image of the non-associated aspects of universal consciousness. There's nothing it's like to be the rock in itself, but there is something it is like to be the whole inanimate universe, and that would be God's inner life. There was somebody from the back there that. Okay, you, yeah.
You said why is for us?
Yeah, the question is. Under this idea that we are dissociated from the rest of the universe, and that if we take psychedelics, we can remember things that we are ordinarily dissociated from, what is the best way to achieve that experience? Is that psychedelics only? Can it be achieved through meditation, through other techniques? Can it be achieved spontaneously? Let me start by making a disclaimer. I'm a scientist and a philosopher, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist, even though I've written a couple of psychology papers. So I'm not the person to come for advice. You should take everything I'm about to say with a block of salt, not even a grain of salt, you know? And you shouldn't trust what I'm about to say. I'll just share with you my own perspective, but that's very idiosyncratic. It's peculiar to me. It's what works for me. So to answer your question straight away, are psychedelics the only way? No, they're definitely not the only way. They are the most immediate way, though. There's no doubt about that. It works. They're also a very difficult way, and I'll tell you why I think it is difficult. Because I think it's a very noisy channel. It's a channel you can force open. You can, you take a crowbar, you open the dissociative wall, and off you go. But it's a very noisy channel. It's very difficult to interpret the specifics of what you're experiencing, because there is a lot of personal material in there. There is a lot of non-personal material, a lot of archetypal manifestations. It's very difficult to say what it means, because it's so noisy and confusing. At the same time, maybe we don't need to really know what it means, because I think the value of psychedelics is, at least for me, is what stays with you afterwards, even when you're not trying to think about it, even when you're not trying to interpret and make something out of it or write a book about it. It changes you. It puts you in contact with something that changes your values, your priorities, the way you look upon the world. If you stay attuned to that layer of cognition underneath the chaos of egoic thoughts, underneath the chaos of conceptualization. What is this? What do I do about this? What does it mean to me? And where am I going to go with this? Is it dangerous? Is it not? But underneath that layer, there is something more subtle, more suave, that has an amazing level of confidence. It just knows. And it steers you in a direction that is more attuned with your own calling. I think maybe I'll translate it this way. Psychedelics put you in contact with your calling if you just know how to listen and see through the chaos of the noise. I'll leave it at that. Who am I, or who are you, when we talk about consciousness? I'll talk about that in the next talk in half an hour. I'll try to answer precisely that question. I'll just give you a hint, just to, as a preamble to the next talk. You are that forms an idea about what you are. You are not the idea of what you are. You are that which comes up with the idea of what you are. Ultimately, I think if there is only one universal consciousness, let me make a break here and let me do a quick preamble. Do you guys know Alan Watts? Of course, everybody knows Alan Watts, right? He, he was an excellent communicator, right? He could make things alive. He was not really original in the sense that he didn't come up with new stuff, but he really could make it alive. And one of the things he once said was that every fish thinks he is human. And have you heard that? I think it was in a book. I don't remember which book. Beyond Theology, I think. I don't quite remember. And what he meant is that the sense of I that every living creature has is exactly the same. Your sense of I, that subtle, nuanced sense of I, as a center of experience, as a point of view attached to a field of qualities, is the same for everybody and for every living creature. Even the fish have that same sense of I. From the point of view of every living creature, the universe they are the center of the universe. The universe is unfolding around them. And that sense of I is the same. I think that sense of I, to go back to your question, is the only thing that is universal. It's the sense of I of universal consciousness, which we all inherit. But because we are dissociated, we dress that sense of I up with a story. The story of your life, the story of what you are, a human being, and who you are, which one amongst the human beings, with a particular history of tragedies and abuse and great experiences and adventures, and particular propensities and tendencies and desires and goals about the future, where you want to go, what it means to be you, what's the meaning of your life, what's your calling, and so on. We dress up that sense of I, but ultimately, even this dressing up is something the I is doing. It's not what it is, it's what it's doing. I'll come back to this. This is too subtle to address just in a question, but maybe I still have time. I think that we're supposed to have a half an hour break. It's past 1. If there is another pressing question, I will take it. Otherwise, I'll take a bio break. And then if you guys want to continue, we'll be back here at 1:30. I have 3 talks this weekend. They are all self-contained, so you're not going to miss anything if you show up only for the 3rd talk. But they are like chapters in a book. They know what I mean. If you watch this talk, the next talk will mean more to you than people who are just talking for the next talk, because there will be more context. So if there's a pressing question, I'll take. Otherwise, we make a little interruption, and we come back in. James.
I do have one that was kind of like, and if you could just comment on the nature of time and reference.
Yeah, the question is about the nature of time and experiments showing some form of retrocausality, things in the future influencing what happens now. There are lots of experiments around that, very different in nature. There are some interpretations of quantum mechanics that involve retrocausation, signals coming from the future and from the past and colliding in what we call the present. There are parapsychology experiments related to that. Dean Radin at IONS in California has done several. There are cognitive sciences experiments about the nature of time. David Eagleman has been working on that after his 2011 book. He has been focusing, I think, on experiments about the nature of time. There's more. In the next talk, I will also talk specifically about the nature of time, but to give you a quick answer, I don't think time exists objectively at all. I think we make it up. We are making it up right now. And it seems to be an extraordinary claim. Hopefully in the next talk I'll manage to sort of, put some oil and allow you to slide into that perspective, which may be nonsense. You be the judge, but I don't think it is. I think time is something we make up. Actually, let me bring it up. There is a physicist. What is his name? He wrote a book. Completely forgot his name. He's friends with Lee Smolin. And what's funny about their friendship is that Lee Smolin, a famous physicist from the Perimeter Institute, he says that time is the only reality. Space is an illusion, it's derivative. And this guy, whose name I forgot, he says precisely the opposite. He says space is the only reality. Time we make up. And they're friends, and they work together. But he wrote an entire book with a formulation of physics in which he removed the letter T for time, and he rewrote all the equations without time, and it all works fine. Yeah, I forgot his name. I'll look it up and I'll tell you. The question is, what did he replace it with? He didn't. He did not replace it with. I'm sorry? He removed the time factor from the equations, and he made it all work. It's a process of elimination that is amenable to mathematical transformations, and he just did that. And he wrote a book with an interpretation of that. And what he says is that it's very difficult to convey that without appealing to time and contradicting myself, because time is built into language, the tenses. When we speak, we are already assuming time. But the basic idea is that he says that the universe is a collection of snapshots that exist concurrently. It's like the music. So, an old record, an old vinyl record, that, all the information is in there. You're just playing it one note at a time. But the information exists concurrently outside time. What he says is that the universe is a collection of snapshots. It's very difficult to make sense of it, because then you start thinking about traversing these snapshots. But to traverse, you need time. I'll try a different approach to explain why time is not there in the next talk. Yeah? All right, guys. I'll see maybe some of you in some minutes. Thanks.